Okay, so we are going to start with factoring trinomials in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not 1, and we're going to divide it into two parts. So part 1 is a little bit more straightforward, and so the lesson is shorter, and the homework is actually as part of the notes. So if you print the notes off, you have to scroll to the end to get the homework, and the solutions are in a separate file. And then the part 2 is a little bit beefier and will require more work, okay? So working through as much homework from that section as possible is advantageous for you. So what we're going to do in part 1 is group factoring, it's called, which is kind of just an extension of finding the greatest common factor. So let's look at these three expressions here. So again, greatest common factor, GCF, is what you always want to have. So in this first one, because there is no x term or x variable with 14, then our greatest common factor is just going to be 7. So we're just going to divide everything by 7. Okay, and if that expression were factorable, which it's not, then we could keep going. But we're just going to, for this little recall, we're just going to do common factoring. So if you look at B, 7x, and then in bracket x plus 3, plus 4, and then in bracket x plus 3. That's sort of weird, right? That's not what you're used to. But this is the kind of expression that we're going to build. And sometimes when we do stuff like this, students will be like, well, how does it always work out? And that's the whole point. If an equation is factorable, then it will work out. Okay, so here you can see what's common with this term. And this term is the x plus 3. So when you're figuring out or thinking of your greatest common factor, it's actually x plus 3. And that's a possibility, and you'll see next year in grade 11, using factored form and actually having a common factor that has a variable in it is going to be one of the skills that you need and you're going to use again. Okay, we can still think of it the same way that we've been doing with the common factors. So in A, we divided by 7, our greatest common factor. So I'm going to divide by x plus 3 because that's the greatest common factor. And so what happens is, similar to A, where the 7 cancels out or you divide, if you have a binomial that has a plus or a minus in the term, so x plus 3, then you can cancel out or divide. Consider a binomial that's exactly the same. So here we have x plus 3 divided by x plus 3, so that will cancel out. If it was x plus 3 over x minus 3, that is not the same, and that's not what we're talking about. Don't even write that down, okay? So it has to be exactly the same. So like I said, when we do group factoring, when you make your common factor that has more than one term in it, it should look the same. That's not by accident, okay? So if it doesn't, then that's kind of good because you can... Not that it's good, not that you don't want it to get it to be the same, but if you don't get it the same, then you think back and go back and say, whoops, I think I made a mistake here. I'm going to fix it. Okay, so now we have our common factor is x plus 3, and what's left is 7x plus 4. Okay, so that's what we have left in our expression. But remember, when you do factored form, we want two binomials usually as our answer, right? Like a term here and a term here, a term here and a term here. Whether they have x's or whatever, plus, minus, it doesn't matter. So that's what we're doing here. And then when you divide by the common factor, then you're essentially writing what's left over inside brackets. So even this one over here, A, where we divided by 7, we brought the 7 out front. So we did that here. And then we, in brackets, included whatever was left. And that's what we wrote here. Okay, so let's try another one. So this time our greatest, Our greatest common factor was, or is, sorry, x minus 7. So you don't have to do the dividing if that messes you up. Really, you're just writing what the x term is and then whatever's left, 4x minus 2. So that minus sign is going to be important. Okay, so how do we get expressions to look like that? Well, what we're going to do is what's called group factoring. So we're creating smaller groups within the problem, and usually done by grouping the first two terms together and the last two terms together. And so it actually, the two terms in the middle, which will be like the b, will have the x only. You could rearrange them to be able to group factor, but most of the time it's going to work, and that's not by accident, right? This is a systematic skill that you can use to apply to different kinds of factoring. All right, so now if we look at our expression here, we have 7x squared plus 28x. Can we find a common factor here? Yes, we can. We're going to divide by 7x. I think is the greatest common factor. So you're left with x plus 4. And then if you look at 8x, negative 8x and negative 32, you can't divide by 7x. So that's why you group the terms and then you are able to factor and get a common factor. So again, what the good thing is about this, once you've decided what goes inside here, like this x plus 4, that means that we need our second group to also make x plus 4. So if it doesn't, then you know that you've screwed up, okay? And you can go back and fix it. So here, if we want to get x plus 4, then we're going to divide. Now, divide by 4. Divide by 8. And 8 goes into 32. So then these 8s cancel. You're left with x. And it goes into 32 4 times. If we only divide by the positive 8, then we're going to get negative 4. And remember, it has to exactly match. So, look here, that's a negative sign. So you're actually, sorry guys. I forgot to write down the common factor. You're actually going to divide by that negative sign. So then it will carry with the common factor. So then negative 32 divided by negative 8 is positive 4. And now it's the same. So what can we highlight? Highlight that if this is negative, you're going to divide by negative and keep that in the common factor you write out front of the brackets. Something else we can say, okay, so now they are going to be the GCF. So I'm going to write that over here, x plus 4. And then you write what's left, 7x, and then keeping that negative sign. So if you want to highlight that as well. Okay, so we want to get, when you group factor, even if you're not dividing by the same thing initially, which usually you will not be, then you want to, your second line, your binomial greatest common factors, or the ones that have an x term in them, should be the same, so that they can become the greatest common factor. Okay, so let's try another one. And we're going to group these two and these two. Okay, so here, the only thing we can divide by is x. So you're going to be left with x minus 5. So now, again, that tells us that our second term should get us x minus 5 as well, okay? They have to match. Now, if let's say you made a mistake in the first one, then maybe your second one is right, but they should match. So you can, before you even get to the way at the bottom, you can still check your answer before you go to the last step of check, which is check by FOIL, which you can do here too. Okay, so this time we're going to divide by 3. And again, if you are not good with your multiplication tables, either get that file on D2L and print it off, or have a calculator with you, and you can even use your simple calculator from your phone. You're just doing multiplying and dividing. Now, sometimes it is helpful if you can do a negative sign, but your calculator does not need to be fancy. Okay, so now our greatest common factor is this binomial, and you write what's left. Okay, so do another one here. This time we can divide by 2 and x. And this one's going to be 5. And then again, I want to get a positive 5, or, oh, look, that negative sign. Make sure you're dividing by negative 5, x plus 5. Now they match. X plus 5 is our factor now, and 2x minus 5 is left. If you choose to write the 2x minus 5 first, like if you switch these brackets around, that doesn't matter, right? Multiplication, it doesn't matter the order you do it in. Okay, so now this one is also another little unique case. So we're going to do divide by 4x here. And we're left with x plus 6. 24 divided by 4 is 6. And if you look over here, well, this is already x plus 6. So what do? So this is a weird case. And normally when in math, we don't really worry about dividing by 1 because it doesn't change anything, right? But now in this case, because we need 2 factors, then it is going to matter. So we are going to we can't divide Okay, so dividing by 1 doesn't change the binomial, but it gets us our other factor. So divide by 1, divide by 1. It doesn't change anything because we want to, remember, we want these two to be the same. Okay, so that's a weird little quirk to this. If, let's say it was x minus 6, then you could divide by negative 1. So that would be a different case. You can do that as well. And I think there's one of those in the homework. Okay, so really that's the only little annoyance to that, okay? So the last part here is to check your answers. So you can still do that. And when you check your answers here, when the expression hasn't been simplified because you're going to factor by grouping, then you just do first, so 7x squared, outside negative 8x, inside plus 28x, and last minus 32. Then if you go back and look, technically at the first one, it's got the 28x first and the minus 8x second, but that does not matter. Okay, so let's say I wouldn't give you the question like this here because now you can't factor by grouping, but you could rearrange it and factor by grouping. So then part 2, what we're going to do is have expressions that are simplified like this. So 7x squared plus 10x minus 32. This is what you're going to factor. Okay, so a little bit trickier, but there's 3 ways that I'm going to show you that you can tackle those problems. So hopefully there's one that you'll like and will help you be successful. X minus 5, x plus 3. First, outside, inside, last. So again, we're good. Not in the order the b terms, but that doesn't matter. We can switch it. First, outside, I feel like a eye doctor. Inside, last. First, outside, inside, and last. Okay, so again, there's the homework there, and check the file. The solutions will be in a separate file for these questions. Okay, thank you. Don't forget to do the part 2 video and that lesson as well, because again, that one's a little bit trickier. Okay.